Hello.
Hey, so we're just waiting for everybody to join here. I'm going to share my screen while we're waiting.
Sorry for the glare in my face. I'm not quite sure what else I can do.
I think you're okay. Uh, no one sees it. Well, it's fine. Everyone is still joining.
Few years younger there.
We have a poll that we can post while people are joining.
Sure,
So we can throw that up here. So
sounds good.
Bar will put it up when he has a chance. Cesar, are you able to launch that first poll?
Yeah, it's coming up right now.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, there it is. First poll is launched for those of you that are waiting and people that are coming in. What do you think an appraiser primarily does? We just want to kind of see what you guys know of the field of appraisals and working with appraisers. So you have a few options here. Do they determine the value of items for resale or insurance purposes? Are they buying and selling antiques and collectibles? Do they help people organize and declutter their homes? Or do they provide legal and tax advice on estate planning? So you guys choose what you think that an appraiser primarily does. And as you're joining, I welcome you all here today. I am Heather Dawson here at Max Sold with the Ask an Expert webinar series. We have Cesar Fuentes here today as well, hosting with me, and we have our presenter today, Timothy Stenger. He is a personal property appraiser. He is in the general Denver, Colorado area, as well as offering services in Milwaukee, Wisconsin as well. Just some basic housekeeping. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so please feel free to put any questions you have into the chat and into the discussion thread. We will have 3 code words, and we will have a few more polls that we will present to you guys throughout the presentation as well. So we will get started here in just a moment. Feel free to put into the chat whether you are an organizer, a move manager, a realtor, or just somebody who's looking to downsize, or a reseller. We'd love to know what you do and what brought you here today. So feel free to put that in there. And as you guys are putting those in, and we'll also show the poll results here in a second.
There are a couple of danger areas you listed there, Heather, that you definitely don't want to be doing as an appraiser.
Yeah. Cesar, do you have the results? All right.
Well, that's good. That's very good.
And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Tim. And when you say next slide, I'll move the slides for you.
Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I just want to begin by thanking Max Sold for allowing me to share some time with you today, talk about myself, and of course, try to give you some education on coins and watches as part of the extremely diverse world of collectibles and valuing them. I have certainly worked with Max Sold before, and I'm sure some of you also have, I understand. And I am hoping that you've been successful. They are an excellent outlet when it comes to solving sometimes, for those of you that are in the business, your clients' issues of de-accessing, decluttering, and making liquid any number of different types of objects. So just to begin, a little bit about me. I originally got into the business I'm in now out of a like for going to auctions. And I got that like because at about the age of 11, I used to go to auctions with my father in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it seems like an eternity ago, but of course that was long before the internet. And so you would look in the paper and see that there was going to be an auction. And in Milwaukee, there were about 3 auction houses out of many, many auctions that occurred across the state that were well known. And so I would go with him and I would sit next to him and typically hold on to the catalog. And while he would bid, I would write down the hammer prices and really got a firsthand experience at what auctions were and what it was like to participate in seeing all sorts of different things that were being made available for sale for any number of reasons. And from that, I continued to travel with my dad and eventually with my parents as they began to become greater and greater collectors of just about everything. And we traveled across the United States. Probably one of the most memorable experiences I had was going to New York City in May of 1987. I think it was 87, when Sotheby's, who I later worked for, had an auction of the estate of Andy Warhol. And that was memorable not only because, of course, of who Andy Warhol is and was, but also because it was not just an auction, it was more of literally a happening, as it were. The people that showed up, many of them weren't there to bid on things, many of them were just there to be a part of that moment in time. So after leaving college with a BA in history, I seriously considered getting my degree in art history. And from there, ended up at the University of Denver in the master's program for art history. And upon getting to the end of that, I decided to go to New York, where I participated in Sotheby's Decorative Arts course, which I believe is still offered. At the time, it was a course that lasted a year. We traveled all around the United States. We had entree into collections, both private and public, even so far as to going into the warehouses of Israel Sack, who was a famous antique dealer in New York City at the turn of the last century and whose grandson was still running the business. I was able to work with some of the real greats as they were, and learned the trade, and then stayed at Sotheby's for about a year and a half. I was what was called a floater. I floated through departments and both cataloged and examined items and learned from the department heads about these things. Then I returned back to Denver, and I did not immediately begin doing appraisals. What I started doing was I became an investment advisor. And so I was a registered investment advisor. I was managing people's portfolios, typically high net worth people, most of whom were collectors of something, not all of them. They knew about my background and said, well, how does, for instance, my art collection factor into my estate planning, into my other, my portfolio of assets? And so over time, I began doing more and more appraisals. And essentially now for the last 25 years, I have just done personal property appraising. I am what is called a generalist. A generalist, I think the term is probably obvious, means that when I do appraisals on almost everything. The only thing that I will not value are precious gems because I'm not a gemologist. And so if a client has jewelry that has precious gems, typically I will work with a gemologist who will then come in and do that aspect of the appraisal. A lot of people probably are saying, well, how do you become an appraiser? What is an appraiser? In some ways, an appraiser, the way you become an appraiser is not the same way that you necessarily become a dentist or a doctor. You can go to school, you can have the experience that I did, but it is really simply years and years of, like a doctor, putting your hands on objects, seeing objects, examining objects. And that's very important as we get into this discussion about, in this case, coins and watches, which is no matter what it is you're looking at, if at all possible, you want to be able to put your hands onto the object. My father is a retired physician. He would say about a patient, did you put your hands on the patient? Did you touch the patient? Did you feel and see what the problem is? Well, it's very much the same when you go to appraise things. You've got to be able to put your hands on them, look at them, turn them around, look for marks, and assess just for yourself what it is you have in your hand. So having said all of that now, and looking at my outline here I prepared for you, when we get into the topic of, I guess, first and foremost, why people collect, there are, as you perhaps have, some of you have experienced in your own professions, there are people who are collectors and there are people who are accumulators. And as we're going to talk about, I believe, coins first, that really is a true application of the term, because throughout time, people, of course, have always accumulated things. But coins, why do people accumulate coins? Well, people accumulate coins in their everyday life. People, at least it used to be, before the era of digital currency and credit cards, people would pay in cash, they'd put money in their pockets, they'd go home, they'd throw their coins into a bucket. But of course, the allure, I guess, of collecting is that a collector is collecting specifically for a reason. Now, that reason might be that they have a particular affinity and love for American coins, or they have a particular affinity for coins from the Roman era, and they're interested in the historical aspect of it. And of course, there are people that also are collecting simply because they want to, in some way, surround themselves with this object that has great meaning for them. Usually, people, of course, that are collectors have some sense of what they have. And when we talk about coins, of course, there are numerous resources that have always existed for coins, in terms of coin value guides, publications before the internet that would be published on a regular basis that would show people what the current market value of coins were on a month-to-month basis, that kind of thing. That, of course, is in opposition to people who are simply accumulators. There are people that simply just accumulate it, perhaps not to the extent of being a hoarder, but they just want it around them and it just piles up. And And that is why typically you will see oftentimes when you go into a residence, you may see and discover, as I have many times, that you will say to a client as you're discussing with them, because they've called you in to look at their father's estate, their mother's estate, and you'll say, well, what about silver? Do you have any silver? Oh, my mom had a coin collection. And then, of course, you say, well, where is it? Oh, well, it's upstairs, or oh, it's in a safe deposit in the bank. Typically, one of two things happens. They'll bring it down, and it will be just piles and piles of coins that their mom bought or their mom got from her dad. And it could just be a lot of currency. Other times, you're going to find that it's a bunch of coins that somebody collected because they wanted to get as much of silver coinage that is pre-1965 American coinage before we stopped minting. So you will see that you never, until you actually see it with your own eyes, that it could be any number of reasons why they've done this, collectors or accumulators. Now, of course, the desire to know value is something that I think has always been around. Certainly, when you look at the history of collecting in general, there have always been auctions. There have always been people who are collectors. There have always been people that are desirous of value. What has changed in the last 30 years is the advent of platforms, for instance, like eBay. The internet has made it much more readily available for people to go online and say, okay, I've got a quarter. And and this quarter looks funny to me. It says 1935. It's George Washington. I know it's silver, but it looks funny. And go online and try to figure out what that value is. Before the advent of the internet, the desire for the knowledge of wanting to know what something is worth was always there, but the internet has exploded it. And it's also caused some problems, because the more information that's available sometimes simply clouds the reality of what it is that somebody has in terms of what it is and what the value is, which is why it's important to have somebody who can come in and do an appraisal, who can be that independent individual and look at it themselves and come back without all of the intervening noise from the internet. So just a quick thing about appraisals and how they work. When we do appraisals, of course, are going to be done based upon the agenda of the client. So in the world of valuations, we have multiple different types of valuations. The highest value is going to be insurance value, which we call retail replacement value. That's the value that if I were to, for instance, have my television set that I just paid $3,000 for fall off the wall and break, and the insurance company is going to reimburse me. Then we have what is called fair market value. Fair market value and marketable cash value are relatively close in meaning, but essentially what that is, that's a value that we use when somebody comes to you and says, I'd like to know what my collection is worth because I'm thinking about selling. And fair market value in its most simplest form is willing buyer and willing seller under no duress. It's whatever two people agree upon. And some people often call this auction value. And when you go bid on something at an auction on one particular day, two people are bidding against each other. Whatever the final hammer price is for that particular object, that's what it's worth on that particular day. That is essentially fair market value. And then, of course, there are, as we go down the line of valuations, the very last valuation is what essentially is called salvage value, or to some degree, scrap value. It's if the item essentially has almost no value, but there's still something that can be gained from it. And when we do appraisals must be, and when you're using an appraiser, it is important that that appraiser has what is called a USPAP certification. USPAP stands for the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. In essence, what it means is that when you contract with an appraiser to do an appraisal, the appraisal itself must follow a certain format. The simplest way of explaining is it typically has 4 parts. First part of an appraisal is the part that states who the appraisal is for, the period of time the appraisal took to complete, the method of value used, what approach you used, which typically is what's called the market comparison approach, that we look at the market in the immediate area and whatever areas are applicable to the items that we're valuing. It will state a total value for all the items. The second part is your catalog. The catalog is just like going to an auction, it's a catalog of values. So it is X number of items, each one with a description, embedded photographs, the heading, the photographs, the description, condition descriptors where necessary, and a value. The third part that should be there is what's called the justification section. Justification section is a written narrative by the appraiser of what they saw, where they found it, and why they valued it the way that they did. And oftentimes, is there a question that I should be answering that down here, or is that for later? I'm seeing a question down there.
We can answer the questions at the end. That's usually
Okay. Okay, I just saw it pop up. Sorry. And then finally, your comparable section. Comparable section is just like if you were buying real estate where you, where applicable, will add in comparables to support the values that you've placed in the document. So that's the general sense of
And
what an appraisal is.
Deborah's question is specifically about appraisals. She does, you could answer it now since you're talking about it.
Sure.
About estate value as part of a probate situation.
Right, estate values, right. So typically in probate situations, what happens is if, for instance, there's a situation where somebody has passed away, and if the estate's in probate, it typically means that somebody didn't leave a will. And so it has to be probated by the court. And typically in those situations, I'm dealing with one actually right now, where there were 3 siblings, father passed away, did not leave a will. They have to go through probate, which means that my job is to come in and actually apply for the estate, typically fair market value, for all of the items in the residence. Many times when someone has the situation where it's not probate, they might want you just to come in and value select items. Maybe, you know, for instance, there's better art, maybe coins, maybe stamps, watches, fine furniture. But in a probate situation, often everything in the house has to be valued. And that value typically that is applied is fair market value. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and I'm going to give everybody their first code word, which is appraisal. Just to remind you, there will be 3 code words. If you email them to me, I will issue a certificate of attendance. And Cesar, you can launch the next poll. How often do you come across collectible coins or watches in your work? Regularly, occasionally, rarely, or never? Just take a moment to answer this one. And the code word is appraisal. Okay. And the results. Of the poll.
Interesting.
Okay. right.
And of course, I suspect that that in part could also be because often, and it may not be in the particular profession you're in, your place to ask the question. But that's why it's so important to ask, because invariably people forget that they have these things. I'll give you one quick anecdote. A few years ago, I went to a woman's house. She had quite a few better pieces of furniture. And I always ask, I go through the same litany, is there anything else you might have? And the one thing that I always ask is, do you have any silver? And she stopped and thought about it for a second and said, oh, yes. And then she didn't say, oh, yes, I've got a silver flatware service. She went upstairs, came back down with a box about so big, and it was full of silver bars that her husband had left behind that ended up being worth about $20,000 just in bullion silver. And so it's always important, to whatever degree of comfort you feel, to ask someone, do you have these things? Simply because you're not being intrusive, you are doing them a favor by asking. So starting with coins, you'll see, of course, that I put on this slide a picture of probably the most rare American coins in history. If you're looking at this slide, you'll see to the center of the Liberty Bust coin, a $50 gold coin that was called a slug, that was minted in San Francisco during the gold rush. It's one of the most valuable coins in American history. Its value, depending upon its condition, can be $300,000 to $400,000. So about coins. Coins is one of the most difficult areas that you will encounter. The reason for this is that by nature, coins are made of metal, and by nature, metal wears down, especially if it's precious metal, whether it's gold or silver. But even so, even bronze and copper. Starting with American coins as an example. So with American coins, and this goes back to my comment about the internet, American coins and all coins, especially those that are collectible, typically are valued based upon their condition, their grading. Now, if anyone were to pick up an old American Red Book Guide to American Coins and open it up, you'll look inside there and you'll see, if you look at pennies, for instance, or you look at silver dollars, you'll see that it'll list the year, it will list the mint. Now, of course, in the United States, there are essentially three mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. However, in the 19th century, originally, there were also mints in New Orleans, and also in, I believe it's Dahlonega, which I think is in South Carolina. This goes back to before the Civil War. After the Civil War, New Orleans, Denver, San Francisco, and Philadelphia. So you'll look in a coin book and you'll see, let's just take a 1924 penny. You're going to look at the penny, you're going to see the image of Lincoln on the front, and you're going to look and see, oh, I'm sorry, that's correct, my apologies. North Georgia is exactly right. Thank you for the correction. I knew I had it wrong in my head. You'll look at it, and when you look at the coin, if there's no mark on the coin, that typically means Philadelphia. Otherwise, you'll see a D for Denver or an S for San Francisco, or an O for New Orleans, although not on pennies. The New Orleans coins are going to be American silver dollars, Morgan silver dollars. So with American coins, when you look in that book, you're going to see the whatever coin you're looking at, you're going to see a year, you're going to see where it was minted, and then you're going to see a bunch of different symbols at the top. Those are the grading symbols. The typically lowest grade beyond circulated is G4, which means good for. This grading goes all the way up into what is called MS, which stands for mint state. You'll also see AU for almost uncirculated. The higher the grade, obviously, the more valuable the coin. There was a time in American grading when the highest mint state was a mint state 65. However, this now has extended to mint state 70. This is because a market has grown for coins that come directly from the US Mint that are specifically designed for collectors. Those coins typically are what are very high-proof coins. Those coins literally have a mirror finish. They are never touched by human hands. With the advent of the internet and the large amount of coins that are available online, grading has become essential. And as a result, people will send their coins in to be graded because grading the coin typically will result in the coin not only being graded by an independent organization, there are several. One is called PCGS, one is called NGC. There's another one actually with offices here in Colorado, ANAC, and they will not only grade the coin, but they will put the coin into what's called a plastic slab. The reason for grading, again, is that if you have a good coin, you think, and the higher the grade, again, the higher the value of the coin. It used to simply be that before all of this, you'd go to a coin shop and you'd buy a coin from a dealer, and he would, typically have a coin in a little paper cardboard cutout, and the coin would say, 1921 Morgan silver dollar, Denver, with a price on it, and they might say, well, we think it's, MS 60, mint state 60. That has changed. And I will just say as an aside that we're not talking about stamps today. This type of grading situation has also now extended itself to stamps in terms of also enhancing the value. So when it comes to coins, because of the marketability that I just discussed about getting coins from the mint that are specifically designed for people to buy, it's made coin collecting even more difficult. And by that, I mean that there are a great deal of coins you can buy directly from the mint that are being sold through sellers on the internet, on cable, telling you this is a great investment. If you buy this now, it's going to be worth probably 10 years from now, even more. Those types of things I tell clients to stray away from. When I go into an estate, when I deal with a client and they have coins, the most important thing you can do is to say, first, let me see them. I have valued many coin collections. I utilize all the same resources that anybody can access in terms of books that explain, again, price guides for the coins. I will go through and I will put my interpretation of what the grade that I think is applicable to the coin. However, I will typically recommend to the client, once we get a value on the individual coins in the collection, that for certain coins that stand out, that we should send them in for actual slabbing and grading. And that again is because we want, in addition to myself, as a third party who's independent, to get that actual grading outfit to look at them as well and render their opinion, and also to slab the coin to protect the coin. It's a very difficult area also because, and I'll use another analogy, I'm dealing with a client right now where they had a large group of American Morgan silver dollars. Some of you may have seen these. These are silver dollars were minted between 1878 and 1904, and then again for 1 year in 1921. They're very collectible. They were minted in Philadelphia, San Francisco, New Orleans, and later Denver. You'll see a picture of one right here. Again, these are high relief coins, meaning that they were produced with, as you can see, looking at the head of Liberty facing to the left and the eagle on the obverse, with a high relief, which meant that in circulation they tended to be worn down. So this coin that I included here is not probably what I would call a mint state 65 coin, meaning a coin that literally looks like it came from the mint. But it's probably, you can look on her cheek and you can see she's got a little bit of an abrasion on her cheek. This probably would grade about MS 60 to MS 62. So this collection I'm going through has all these Morgan silver dollars. They need to be looked at independently. This collection had a cache of American, what are called Indian head pennies. Those have to be looked at because those are a more difficult area and predate the 1930s. And then there was a group of early American coins. And so the further back we go with coins, the earlier the denomination of coins, the more complex it becomes. And that's why for myself, because I have experience doing this, I will look at them, I will catalog, I will document them, I'll put the value on them, and then I'll make that once we do that, we take them to a formal grading service to get essentially a second opinion. Now, what has happened with American coins in particular, although some others we'll discuss in a second, especially American silver and gold coins, is that with the substantial increase in precious metal prices, this has driven naturally the market higher as well. Now, of course, we haven't discussed yet, and I'll discuss now, that these coins, like the one you're seeing here, or the coins in the previous slide, which were all American coins that were actually, with the exception of the large gold slugs, these were all coins that were minted by the United States government and were put into actual circulation for use, everyday use. Since that time, the US government has produced coins which are simply bullion coins. They are not coins that are meant for actual use every day, but are simply minted and sold for people to accumulate as a way of accumulating precious metal. So, and that, as a result, you've got original American coins that have value as collector's pieces, as actual former circulated currency, and you've got bullion coins. But both are affected by the rise and fall in precious metal prices, much in the same way that they are affected by the fact that as a commodity, interest ebbs and rises. On the opposite side, and you can see in the slide, I've listed here Krugerrands, Pandas, and Imperial American Gold. So Krugerrands, I'm sure many of you are familiar with those, issued by South Africa. These coins, again, were issued primarily for the purpose of accumulating them as bullion. You will see on those coins that it will have a natural value, but the value is not truly the value because Krugerrands are actually 0.999 fineness gold. They're almost pure gold. The same is true with Chinese pandas. These coins have been issued for decades. They also will have a denomination on them But the difference being is that even though it may say 100 yuan, the coin is actually, again, 0.999 gold. They're simply there to be issued and sold as bullion. When it comes to imperial European gold, this tends to be gold that, you'll see I said here before 1919, is gold that was issued by England, France, Switzerland, Italy, Germany. Many of these coins were actually issued as American gold coins were in the 19th century for actual use. But they since, of course, now have simply become commodities whose value lies solely in their gold content. And again, this is a topic which really we could discuss do a deep dive in detail at some point, because there are so many variables when it comes to dealing with coins, which is why, of course, again, you want somebody who at least is qualified and has experience and can recognize what to look for in these coins, to look at them first before you send them to an outfit, in this case, of course, Max Sold, who then can put them online and sell them. But first, you've got to look at them closely because there are so many variables. A small anecdote. The Morgan silver dollar you're looking at here has a specific weight, as do all coins that are issued. That weight is intrinsic in terms of how much silver is in it, how much copper is in it. Several years ago, the Chinese began minting Morgan silver dollars that look just like the real thing. However, they're not. They weigh less. So for whatever reason, I'll leave that open to conjecture, the Chinese government allowed duplicate Morgan silver dollars to be minted. They look just like the one you're looking at here. You might think it was real unless you weighed it and discovered that it actually has less silver in it than a actual true Morgan silver dollar. That's one pitfall. And again, the other major issue with coins, as we just discussed, is condition. Condition is everything. Certain coins that are in a lesser condition may have a value of $100. But if that same coin is deemed to be 5 grades higher, that coin is now worth $10,000. And that's why this whole milieu can be very complicated, because in part, it's number one about identifying what it is, and number two about discerning, what the grade is, because the grade ultimately is going to be everything in terms of what its ultimate value is going to be. In terms of buying and selling, I very much strongly believe that when it comes to selling, an organization such as Max Sold is the appropriate venue. Why? Because when you bring anything that's collectible, typically, and this is not to besmirch dealers because there are many good dealers out there, but when you bring an item to a dealer, naturally that individual is going to try to buy your object for less.
Oh,
Sorry? Did somebody just jump in there?
I think it was just some background static.
Oh, okay, sorry. Typically, a dealer is going to try to buy for less because, of course, they need to have as large of a margin as possible when they resell the item. By putting it into an actual online venue, what does it do? It allows the largest number of people to vie for the object and therefore to compete and to bring the price up. And this is why I very much steer my clients away from going to dealers, simply because of that reason. Now, private buyers, if you've been in the business a long time like I have, you acquire clients who end up being private buyers who are legitimate individuals. private sales can be advantageous to your client. However, I would say ultimately, really, the auction is going to be the best, just all around in terms of trying to get as much as you possibly can for whatever the item is. And I would also say again, as I said before, I would caution people who want to become collectors in this area because it is a very difficult area. And it's become so much more difficult, as I said before, because now there is such an emphasis on grading everything first. There are people that will not buy coins unless they're graded. And I will also close this discussion by saying that it is not uncommon for people who have coins and get them graded. If the coin comes back, let's say that silver dollar we were looking at comes back and the grade is almost on, there's a grading called AU 55, almost uncirculated 55. The next grade up is Mint State 60 and then Mint State 62. If somebody gets that coin back and they're unhappy with that grading, oftentimes they will decide to go to a different reputable grading outfit, hoping for a higher grade. And so this has just made the whole milieu of coin collecting more complicated. But again, it is a very interesting area and one that I would definitely say, if you have clients, it's good to ask them, find out about this, especially now with the way that the precious metals market is moving. Let's see. Now, watches. Watches are.
One sec. I want to give the second code word, which is coins.
Yep.
So everybody make note of the second code word. And then Cesar, feel free to launch the poll. The next poll is, which area do you feel least confident about when handling coins? Just so we know here. Is it identifying authenticity? Was it understanding market trends, estimating value, proper handling and storage, and finding the right buyers, which is the area that you guys find the most challenging when you're helping your clients or navigating your collections? So give everybody a moment to answer. And one more second, and then we'll share the results. And the results are estimating value, identifying authenticity are the big ones.
Which really go together, of course.
Yeah. There were some questions about handling and storage.
Yes.
People are wondering about that. Okay. All right. So we are moving on now to watches.
Right. So the watch market has its own complexities. And of course, watches are, just as coins and everything else that is collectible, a commodity. When we talk about watches, I think let's just to begin in terms of the commodity aspect. During the pandemic, between 2020 and 2021, the price for Rolexes and for new or used Rolexes exploded, sometimes as much as 50 to 70% above stated values before. Now that market has since fallen, and there was a time when you could not get a Rolex because of this intense focus on them as a commodity. So why a commodity? Well, of course, number one, why are watches a commodity? When we talk about watches, we start, of course, with the fact that originally people carried pocket watches. Pocket watches, of course, are movements that are set in metal, and typically better watches were set in actual gold or platinum, versus watches that were set in what is called gold filled, which has a very thin layer of gold, or rolled gold, or they were set in nickel or in steel. The market for watches continues to be one to watch again now because of the increase in precious metal prices, which makes just the cases of better watches that are in precious metal more desirable. You'll note that I put on here Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet versus Tag Heuer. Oh, I never pronounce it correctly. Tag Heuer, Seiko, Breitling, and Omega. The reason I said that is because the value of a watch, aside from its actual case and the bezel around it, of course, is the movement itself. And who makes the movement? The first three companies, and actually Breitling, make their own movements. This is very important because with a better watch, the watch company will make its own movement, and that movement is considered then to, because it is a native movement to the actual watch, makes it more valuable than a watch such as a Seiko, where they don't necessarily make their movements, or they don't always make their movements. The values of watches are very disparate, and it gets very complicated because, and I think we'll just use Rolex as our best example of this. When you're looking at a Rolex, let's say you're in someone's house, they've got a Rolex, they want to sell it. There are major factors as to what that value is. Of course, the number one factor is what kind of Rolex is it? We just discussed this. Is the watch band gold and stainless steel? Is it all gold? Is it platinum? Is the bezel, that's the part that goes around the movement, what is it? Is it gold? Is it another type of metal? Does it have its box? The value of better watches is contingent upon having all the original documentation with the watch. Therefore, the box that it comes in, therefore the accompanying card that states its serial number, and any other documentation. This adds greatly to the value of making the watch collectible and more valuable. That is key. And the rarity of these watches, again, is another complex area because these companies have been in business for well over 100 years, especially Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars, for instance, and even Breitling. And of course, certain watches had very low manufacturer numbers. Some were higher. Some, of course, are not necessarily rare in their manufacture, but they may have a connection. For instance, some few years ago, I believe Heritage, it might have been Heritage, sold a Rolex. I think it was a Rolex that had belonged to Paul Newman. His daughter had given it to her then husband. He then gave it back. It went to Heritage and sold for several $100,000. So there's always, of course, the historical connection that also makes them collectible. Going back to understanding how to identify these watches, there are a couple of important things. With a wristwatch, of course, you want to look at it and make sure the serial number matches. That's absolutely crucial. Many times, people will come to a dealer with one of these watches. The dealer will look at the watch, look at the back, open the back of the watch, and discover that the interior doesn't match the exterior, which typically means that it's either a fake or that it has been tampered with. Going back to pocket watches, this is a little bit more difficult because with pocket watches, we need to open the back of the watch. And typically, the back of a pocket watch, if you've ever seen one, has the back, and then it opens, and it will typically have on the inside of that, it will have the name of the case manufacturer. It will typically have a number that may or may not be the serial number, not of the watch, but of the case. And then it might be marked whether or not it is actually precious metal. However, when you open that back part, then there's an additional back which covers the actual movement. We want to open that up because when we open up that part, that will show us typically if indeed the case is 14 karat gold, 18 karat gold, and will also reveal the movement of the watch, which will have serial numbers for the movement. And those serial numbers can be useful to you if you're looking up online. Let's say you're looking up a Hamilton watch or any number of American 19th century watchmakers. Many of these companies, there are websites where you can put in the serial number, which will tell you the date and how many were made. The other thing about the pocket watch is that when you open up one, you'll often see it'll say 10 jewels or 16 jewels. That refers to the number of synthetic jewels. They're not actual precious jewels that are in the movement that are used as part of operating the movement. The higher the number of jewels in a pocket watch, typically the more valuable the watch and the more expensive the watch when it was new. So that is something that is very important to look at. Again, going back to a wristwatch, it's going to be, of course, do the serial numbers match? Do we have all the original documentation and paperwork with those watches? The other thing is complications. With pocket watches, especially very fine ones that were made by American and European watchmakers, complications are the number of things the watch can do. So, of course, a watch, will have its movement. It will tell the time. It may have a separate, smaller dial that will show the seconds. But are there additional things? For instance, does it also tell you the date? Does it tell you the day? On a pocket watch, does it play music? This is a complication. So the more complications on a watch, the more valuable that watch is as well, assuming those complications work. So these are all important factors. In terms of storing watches, when people invest a great deal of money in a Rolex, in a Breitling, and that type of a watch, those tend to be what are called automatic movements, which means that the watch is driven by the movement of your wrist versus winding the watch, a spring-driven watch. And in terms of that, people tend to have watch boxes that will actually keep those watches moving so that you will be able to then change out your watch every day but not lose the time. Let me see if there's anything else that I needed to touch on here. Oh, yes. So in terms of the current trends, at the moment, because of precious metal and its involvement in the collecting of coins and certainly with better watches, right now the market for both, the projection for the markets for both is going to be much higher. I've looked at some recent data that says that the general consensus in the next 15 years, prices for collectible coins and for watches will probably increase between 25 and 30%. There are, there are always, records being set when something unusual appears at auctions. Certainly that's the case with coins, also with watches. The main thing that I think is most important for people to understand is that if you are going to be a collector and you're going to invest a substantial amount of money into coins or watches, the key to remember is everything is a commodity. So even if people can project that these things are going to continue to increase in value, there are always going to be peaks and dips. And that's something which you can try to predict, but it's always uncertain because even if a good example, quick analogy, in the early 1980s, people paid enormous sums of money for American Victorian furniture. Today, Victorian furniture is not popular, and it's very, very difficult to sell. Easier to sell, of course, coins and watches, because as commodities, they tend to be higher valued, but like all things, there are always going to be those peaks and valleys. And so you really need to think carefully before you invest a lot of money in these areas of collecting. And I hope this was informative to you to some degree.
Third code word is watches. I was muted. Sorry about that. And we have one last poll. This is a little unrelated to the topic. We're just curious to know from our attendees what format of learning would be most helpful for future training on valuables, like coins and watches. We had one on costume jewelry a couple months ago. Would it be more webinars, hands-on workshops, downloaded guides or checklists, or one-on-one consultations with experts like Tim? Max Sold has relationships with appraisers all over North America. Tim is in the Denver area and Milwaukee area. For those of you that are out there, for all I know, Tim, you might do virtual consults too. I'm not sure, but
absolutely, if necessary, sure.
Awesome. Well, and we do have time for questions as well. So we'll show the results of those polls, which I'm sure will be interesting here. And then make sure we get some questions answered. More webinars and downloadable guides. Okay, that's good to know. Guides and checklists to bring on site, know what to look for. Great. Awesome. Make a note of all that. Fantastic. Thanks, guys. We do have questions. Okay, what trend period is popular now? Mid-century, is that what's still most popular? And do you do CD or record appraisals, Tim?
What was the first part?
What is most popular now? What's trending? Is it still mid-century modern? That
Okay.
Paul is asking.
Yes, definitely the market for mid-mod is still strong. It has ebbed a little bit, but still very strong. Recent auction results for that period of furniture are very, very good. I just actually was watching a sale in Chicago, and it was most of the hammer prices on chairs, Ames chairs, that type of thing, all were above their high estimates. And yes, I do value vinyl, things like that. Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. I know there's been questions about storing items, how to best store coins, how to best store watches. Any suggestions on that?
Well, a couple things. In terms of storing them, it really depends what it is. If we talked about Morgan silver dollars, for instance, or let's say you've got some early American coins that are we call large cents, which are 1 cent coins, or later the small cents. If you've got those kinds of things, you really should, at least at the beginning, store them in individual little pockets, because as we discussed, ultimately, to understand their value, you need to keep them so they're not being abrased by each other in a bag or laying in a pile somewhere, because that's only going to decrease their value because it's going to affect their condition. So that is a starting point, is to keep them all separate. And obviously I would say, keep them in a safe location, locked up, simply because it's very easy for something like that to become portable in a situation where someone may enter your home, and you don't want that to happen.
A bunch
then
of people are asking for your contact info, Tim. Can you
Sure.
share that? I'll put it in the chat also here. You can say it also, and I'll type it in.
Oh, sure. Well, my email is just my last name, stenger.timothy@gmail.com. You can easily reach me, and certainly you can reach out to me. My direct number is 303-548-8614. And feel free, to text me an image of something. I'm always happy to look first and give you an initial thought on what it is you have.
Somebody wants to know about cleaning with general crud on coins. What's the best?
Oh, no. Do not clean your coins. Do not. Leave them alone. You will see, if you were to go online and find a numismatic auction and go through the catalog, you will often see in the condition descriptor where it may say cleaned. And that's the worst thing you can do for a coin, is to clean it. And I did see a question pop up at the bottom of the screen about having a bunch of dimes.
Yes.
It depends what they are. Again, American currency stopped being silver after 1964. So if you've got bags of dimes and they all predate 1964, then the question is are they all very circulated? In which case, it's just a matter of the value of the silver in the dimes, or are they mercury dimes, which are the ones that predated the Roosevelt dimes in 1946, or do they predate the mercury dimes? Because then again, it's more about, we have to examine them first, check the dates, and see if there are what are called key dates. Key dates are within the realm of all the different coins that were minted by the mint, in this case in the US, are coins that either had a low circulation, had a low number of coins issued, or came from a particular mint that makes them worth more than their counterpart from another mint. So it just depends. But if that's what you have and it's just silver, more than likely you're not going to find any sort of rarity. It's just going to be the silver content.
We have some questions in the Q&A also. Have proof sets held their value over time?
No.
No.
Absolutely
Okay.
not. No, in fact, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. We have so many questions. So
Right. So, no, I mean, for instance, this client I'm working with now, for some reason, their dad bought 20 1969 proof sets. The amount that he paid for them in 1969 in today's dollars, I think is twice as much as the proof set is actually worth in the common market. Because, and by the way, that's something else I should have mentioned to you all, which is when you go online and you go to these sites like NGC or AppMex or any of these grading services that publish coin values, or if you buy a typical red book on the value of American coins, keep in mind that those values are not necessarily the realistic values you're going to get if you send those coins to auction or if you go to a dealer. They tend to be inflated, so beware of that, because it can give you, you can end up being dejected in what you end up receiving versus what your expectations were.
Okay, and if a coin is old but not in good condition, are you better off just selling it for the silver weight?
Contingent upon what it is. So I'm going to give you a quick example. Maybe you can see this, maybe you can't. This is a 1819 American 50-cent coin. I don't know if it comes across very well or not.
Yeah.
Okay, this coin is probably in what I would say is probably under AU 55. it's circulated to some degree, but it is for the most part intact. The Liberty on her head is clear. This coin probably at auction would bring $300. So it really is contingent upon how truly worn it is. I come across coins all the time that are as old as this, that are literally worn blank. Then it's just silver. But it's incumbent upon whoever it is that is looking at it to make sure before that it may be incredibly worn, but it could also be incredibly rare. That's what we need to vet things first before. But yes, if it's literally worn away to where you can't even see the date. I mean, this is typical of, for instance, American Buffalo nickels, because of the way that they were designed and the high resolution on them. Most of them have the dates worn off, in which case it has nominal value. So it really is contingent upon that. So typically, yes, but always vet first.
Okay. And does it make more sense to take watches to local watchmakers, or do jewelers know enough about watches?
The best thing to do if you've got a very good watch is to go to somebody who is a jeweler, probably, who does sell watches and who can carefully open the watch if necessary and look at it without scratching the bezel or the back. But I would recommend someone that probably advertises actually in buying and selling watches, just because theoretically they have more experience in giving you an opinion. Always being careful to, if you walk in, here's the thing. You walk in, that's fine. Go to someone that says, I buy and sell watches. But if you walk in and they make you an offer the minute you walk in, don't take their offer.
Okay.
Because you should then say, wait, why is this person offering me something so quickly? And go get a second opinion. Because that's always and the other thing too is, as an appraiser, I never offer to buy anything from anybody. I'm an independent party. I'm there to look, to advise, to help them to find an outlet, perhaps once we valued something. But it is, if anybody walks in your house and claims they're an appraiser and makes you an offer on something, kick them out the door.
We have a lot of questions on how to sell. I know Bobby Joe wants to connect with you. I put your info in the chat. She's in Denver. She wants to chat with you about navigating that. Deb Lawrence has a question specifically about a woman's 14 karat gold watch. She says, if she says one item, should she look for a specialty auction for a 14 karat gold woman's watch? Should she add it to another auction?
It depends. It depends who made the movement, who's the watchmaker. It all depends. And like I said, does it have its original box? Is it just a loose watch? I see a lot of watches that were made in the 30s and 40s in the United States that have platinum bezels and platinum wristbands, little tiny diamonds on them. And for the most part, the value is just in the metal. But it really is contingent upon who made the watch.
Okay, awesome. And then there's a question if there's any value in paper silver certificates.
I saw that. Banknotes and currency is another difficult area. There is some value in them, but it's always going to be about condition. And again, people, not so much for an American, 1928 $1 silver certificate, but people will get them graded. If the bill is not creased, if it looks like it's literally right from the Treasury Department, of course the value is going to be higher. But the average value for a silver certificate from the 1920s, 1930s, 50s, 60s is going to maybe be slightly more than the face value.
Okay. We have so many questions still, and I know we're over time, but
it's okay. I'm happy to keep answering.
Someone, Vicky, said that they inherited a set of Morgan silver dollars with dates from 1878 to 1921. They're all uncirculated. Original price was $2,100, but from your knowledge, what would the estimated fair market value? I guess she's asking about value on a set of Morgan silver dollars from 1870 to
Um,
1921. What should she do? How should she proceed with this?
so this is a complete set.
I'm not sure. She said a set though. They inherited a set.
Okay. Um, it depends what a set means. I mean, if a set means a true set from 1878 to 1921, that could mean a lot of things because the first year of issue, there are a number of 1878 Morgan dollars that are valued because some had 7 tail feathers versus 8 tail feathers. So I don't know if it means that. And then, of course, we have all those years to 1904 and then 1921, where we have again the New Orleans, we have San Francisco, we have Philadelphia, and we have Carson City, which I did neglect to mention that as a mint also. So if it's a complete set in the true sense, it's probably worth a great deal more than that just in the silver value alone. But it's going to be about what does that mean and what examples does she really have?
Okay. Yeah, a few people are asking if you do Zoom consults, Zoom appraisals. Can they reach out to you for that?
So I'm happy to do Zoom consultations. It's always better to be there in person. When I do evaluation, of course, it's always going to be a written evaluation because it is a certified document. It's not just a verbal appraisal. It's not, I mean, it's not truly binding in that sense. There is such a thing in the appraisal document. There's a section that is titled limiting conditions. Limiting conditions is if I can't see it in person, so I have to value it if you're showing it to me online or if you're showing it to me through digital images. So it can be done, yes. But the appraisal will always be a written appraisal versus a verbal one.
Okay. And a couple questions about stamp collections. Do you appraise
Yes.
those? Do you have any quick tips about what to keep?
Yes, I have done a large number of philatelic collections. I am a stamp collector as well. Yes, and stamps are, again, it all depends what it is. Is it American stamps before 1935? Are they foreign stamps? And if it is a better collection before 1935, there are, again, many factors that go into valuing them. Are they hinged in the book? Are they original? Are they canceled? And then even more minutia in terms of certain stamps, how well are they centered? You know, the margins around the stamp. But yes, I've done many collections, and I would love to see it.
And they would also like to know about engravings on things like watches. Will that hurt the value if there's an engraving?
Not necessarily, because certainly with pocket watches, it's quite common. I do think it would be perhaps a little detrimental for a better wristwatch. So I would say probably not so much for a pocket watch, but more so for a wristwatch. Yes, better to have it clean because somebody who's going to buy it wants it to be clean for them.
Okay, and then I think we have one more question here was put in here earlier, which is this is one that appraisers love to get. An anonymous attendee said, I recently had my mother's art collection appraised as part of dealing with her estate. And there was one specific oil painting valued at $17,500, and we sold it at auction, and it only sold for $2,700. That seems like a big discrepancy between the appraisal value and what it sold for at market. I'm curious why that might be the case. The painter was named Max Weber, if that helps.
Well, I think I know the name. Well, first and foremost, I presume they used what method of valuation? Do they use fair market value? Do we know? Did they say? I'm presuming so.
She didn't say.
Right. So what I would say about that is this. When we do appraisals, we do our due diligence. We look at the artist. Typically, it is important when you do an appraisal. Let's use this artist as an example. We'll look up the artist. Is it a listed artist? If it is, we look at auction records. We typically want to look at about a recent 3-year period to get a sense of what the market is, to give us a sense of what the work, what value the work should have. But there are other factors. What media did the artist use? Did he use oil? Did he use something else? What is the subject matter of the painting? Is the painting a large canvas? Is it a small canvas? All those things factor into the possible outcome. Ultimately, I use the term, it's the vagaries of the auction. There are never any guarantees. You can go into a sale very well marketed, just the way that you guys market your sales. Everyone can see what's there, what's available. You can see all the pictures, you know what it is, and you bid on it. And sometimes it's a bad day. Sometimes the right 3 people are in the room and it sells for 10 times what you expected to sell for. So there are never any guarantees. The only thing I will say is that depending upon the individual you're dealing with, if they're concerned about this, is you might want to consider sometimes putting a reserve on the piece, if the auction house you're using allows that, to give you sort of a safety net for your piece. But I would have to see what it was. I'd have to look up the artist. Sometimes the subject matter isn't appealing, and that's why it doesn't sell.
And I think, Tim, you'd probably agree with this too. I know, having done some art appraisals, one thing, if you're doing your due diligence, an appraiser appraising art is going to take into consideration where that art sells best too. And
Yes, exactly
I've
right.
seen that happen before. I've had to do reports where I've had to tell people this is considered decorative unless you're in this town in Indiana where this guy is
Right.
from, and they do this annual sale every year. It's
Absolutely correct. And Heather, that's exactly right. And that's something I should have said that you just said, which is when I talked about appraisals and the approaches you use, the market comparison approach, right?
yeah.
So there are things you're going to come across, as you just said, Heather, that are very saleable, but it's got to be in the right market. So if you're in Denver, a particular piece of mid-century modern furniture might do okay, but if it goes to Chicago, which is a mecca for mid-century modern furniture, it's probably going to do much better. And so you've got to take that into account, because every market is different, even Victorian furniture, right? I mean, Victorian furniture has been sort of dead forever, but there are places, Dallas, Atlanta, where it still does okay. It just depends upon the region of the country and the prevalent taste.
It does great down here in the Low Country in Charleston, Savannah, because
Absolutely right. See,
homes.
right, because people want it.
We are
So you,
out of questions and way over time, but that's great. That means that everybody had a lot of questions, a lot of engagement. Thank you so much, Tim, for spending all this time this evening to share everything.
pleasure. No, thank you. I hope I was cogent.
Yeah, it was great. I think a lot of people are going to be reaching out to you. They got your info here. Guys, I put my email there as well. If you need certificates for CEU credit, email me the code words, heather.dawson@maxsold.com. And if you need Tim's info because you didn't get it, I can send it to you. I can do an intro email as well.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks, Cesar, also.
Yes, thank you, Cesar.
And have a good night, everybody. Thanks,
Have a
Tim.
good night. It's been a pleasure.